So we want to just start this up. All right.
Ready.
So
You pivot.
we'll still talk about this, but Bob Russell, welcome.
Thank you.
So we were just talking about how we. So why don't you just start off this way? Tell us who you are, what your kind of background is, and how we know each other.
Well, my name is Bob Russell. I've lived here in Chehalis, I guess, 22 years. I spent my life in pulp and paper. Grew up in Astoria and then went in the Navy, and then pulp and paper, worked for companies like Weyerhaeuser, Port Townsend, Longview Fiber, all the mills up and down the coast. About 20 years ago, I had a chance to pivot, and I moved to Chehalis. I worked outside the industry for 3 years for a friend of mine, and then went back to pulp and paper. Loved Chehalis, never moved. Stayed here, made my home here. My kids grew up here, graduated from high school. I retired a few years ago. My interests over the last 20 years here in Chehalis were really driven by the conservation district and my own interest in development. And what I mean by that is, in retirement, I've gotten into salmon restoration and habitat restoration, and that's solely due to a personal interest that was fed by the county. And so a lot of times you see my name, it has something to do with salmon or salmon restoration. Also in retirement, I guess the other avenue I deal with is industrial development. I like woody biomass. I spent my life in that industry. And so I've been working with the Alliance of Lewis County to try to generate business opportunities in that sector, the wood sector. So that's kept me pretty busy for the last few years.
Yeah. So, and then more recently, we worked on the planning commission together, doing that. So if you're trying to go to sleep, you can check us out on our other channel, the Lewis County Planning Commission on YouTube. But no, so that's interesting, because I actually didn't realize that you had kind of your initial background was in paper or that industry, and so that it's funny that because I know you were always interested in the woody biomass stuff, which I'd love to know more about, because I actually don't know anything about it. I don't get how I don't understand what it's all about. So I'd love to talk more about that. But we were just talking, or you were just talking about the light pollution, which, you know, it's funny that you bring that up, because when I lived in Long Island, I mean, you can't even barely see the sky because there's so many houses, so much light. And you were just talking about, you know, good neighbors and all that stuff. My question that I thought of after that was, you know, how much of that do you think is just people not even realizing when they're building these things? Like they're just doing, like, because I had a conversation with a buddy of mine last week, and he was talking about how there's essentially a couple different kinds of people. There's managers and producers. And managers, their mindset revolves around those kinds of things, right? And producers are just pumping out production. And so I know a number of people who are producers. I know some people who are managers. But I was thinking, as you were saying that, builders, it's like, I know a lot of them that it wouldn't even cross their mind, because they're just busy doing the thing and then moving on to the next thing that they got to do, and they're occupied with all these other things. And I guess that is where, I mean, I'm no fan of regulation, but I also understand you do have to have standards so that people know what they're supposed to be doing, because those same producers, if you just tell them, like, well, it's just got to be like this, they'll go, okay. They don't care. They just want to build it. So on that note, is there something that you can do with, you know, because obviously if you build your house right next to an exit or close to an exit, you got to kind of expect someday in the future it's going to have a lot of commercial. And so what do you do with that? Because obviously the businesses want to be seen. There's people just flying by the freeway there. It's like, I want you to know I'm here so you can pull in. Like, what is the compromise there? What would be the solution? Is there like a diffuser for that light that makes it bright and stand out without actually traveling? Or is there stuff like that out there?
Well, I guess I'd back it up because managers and producers, that's a really I've heard farmers and that analogy of farmer and harvester type of thing. I was fortunate in the last 3 weeks to have visited one of the most conservative states in the union. I was down in Arizona. And I don't think anybody will argue that Arizona's fairly conservative, but when I left Arizona, just an hour and a half from downtown Phoenix, there's a community, Sedona, Arizona, and many people have probably been there. I would venture that most people that have been there would say it's probably one of the most beautiful places they've ever been in their entire life. World travelers would say that. And here's the thing. Sedona has very strict covenants all around. Light, colors of houses, the height of houses, the stoplights in the neighborhood. But because of that, Sedona's famous for being able to see all the stars. And every house you go to has a telescope in it if you short-term rental. So I think there's a time to manage something if you want it done in a way that, is good for the neighborhood. Let's pivot to exit 72 or any of the highway freeway exits. They are very well lit, and there's a reason for that, safety and all that kind of thing. But I don't want to throw out the light pollution thing for but what about, right? Just 100 feet from my house, I've lived here 22 years, and my neighbor put up an arborvitae hedge. And they put up that hedge because the neighbor across the street has a beautiful barn, and he runs about a 500-watt light with no cover on it. So they've literally grown an arborvitae hedge to protect from light pollution from the neighbor right across the street. And so when I think about that one, I go, well, there's an example of a nuisance. It's a frickin' nuisance. It'd be like somebody leaving their garbage can out all week when everybody else doesn't. But depends on where you want to live, right? So people, there's been an issue about, well, if I'm in the county, I shouldn't have to worry about lights. I should only have to worry about them in the city. I live in the county. The example I gave is in the county.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've seen stuff like that. I do think that point is interesting because we brought this up quite a bit on the show, but I think you're the one that said this to me. That a lot of people think that Lewis County is like more Republican or conservative, and that it's actually more libertarian, and it's not really. So I've thought about that a lot, and it's come up a lot in our conversations. But I think that's the case, and I think the thing that's really funny about libertarians is that they are all very like, don't tell me what to do, but they also don't want anybody else to do things that disrupt all the things that they want to do. So it's like a very one-sided, and then you take libertarianism to its like full-on, conclusion, and it's just chaos. But I do think there's a lot of that goes on here because, we've talked about this at the Planning Commission. If you go on vacation, you want to go stay at a place that has all these covenants. Like, you want to stay at a place where all the houses are nice. They all have a theme. Everything's, like, people love going to Leavenworth. I love going to Leavenworth. That's why I like it. But if you have a house or a business there, you don't get very many choices at all, So I think that's funny, and I'm not necessarily advocating that, there's that level everywhere, but I think it's important for people to realize, if you decide I want to go be someplace that's pleasant and nice and clean, and like that's usually why you go there, because everything's very controlled. Mm-hmm. There's very high standards. So I think there's something that we can take from that and say, well, maybe we don't want to go to that extreme. We don't want to be a resort town, but maybe we want to have a little bit of that feel where there's some continuity, there's some level of standards. I mean, that's another thing around here is that, that drives, I mean, my wife gets so frustrated with this stuff, and it is frustrating, but, you build a new place, and they're just all over you about every little thing. And then you're driving around town, and people's houses are falling over, and, there's tarps on roofs. And, and I don't know what the economic issues are in those houses. Are most of them that I find out about, they're actually, some landlord owns it that doesn't live, in the state, and they don't care. Nobody's really managing it. And so there's no real amount of code enforcement. I mean, we've heard people in the city and the county talk about this, that unless somebody calls, they could drive by it all day long. They're not going to go bother that person.
I was on a meeting the other day, and it was a meeting joined by Department of Ecology, Fish and Wildlife, DFW, Trout Unlimited, Ducks Unlimited, all kinds of people that are in the space, the habitat space. And something came up on an inspection issue. And one of the people from ecology, and I sit on this board as a representative for Lewis County, just to watch what's going on. And one of the people from ecology who does water quality and air quality and catches the phone calls from people on the other end that are upset, said this, that they normally, they do not go out and slap people on the wrist the first time. They just send a letter, and they don't even target that house. They target the whole neighborhood, and they just send a letter like burn barrels are illegal since 1974, and people still use them, right? So if your neighbor has a burn barrel and it stinks really bad and you write that up, you might have what happened to me and get a letter to the whole neighborhood about burn barrels being illegal. So they educate the whole neighborhood. They don't target that person. So I think there's a way to do enforcement that's better than shoving your head in the ground and pretend it doesn't happen.
Yeah, no, agreed. I've talked to a few folks in this about this. And one of the things that gets brought up to me a lot, which I do think is potentially an issue, is that we're very understaffed around here. And then also we don't pay our employees competitive wages a lot. And so a lot of our people are, especially our homegrown talent, they'll come in, they'll get a job here, maybe they're really good. They get poached like right away. They can get offered 20, 30, 50% more, sometimes higher than that, to go to jurisdictions that are smaller. Yep. And so the work is easier, they're making a lot more money. But, who's politically going to be, I mean, there's so many facets to this. We could go on about this one forever, but, who's politically going to be brave enough to say, well, we have to raise taxes because that gets you voted out around here immediately. And, I get that. And then also on the other end, who's going to be brave enough politically to go through the system that we have and cut out all the waste and all the stuff and actually be a really tight steward of the money, making sure that the real priorities are getting funded, and we're not just funding things just because we've always funded them or however that goes. And I don't know the budget, so that may not be fair for me to say, but I do know of plenty of specific instances where even the people who were administering these funds were like, well, what are we doing?
You brought up a good point on had to do with enforcement, and that the county, you're right, staffing is not what it should be. But one thing about enforcement is you don't have to enforce 100% of the people. 90% of the people in my life are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and there's 10%, whether they're employees or customers or landowners, that may not do what they're supposed to do. Of those 10%, half of them are doing it because they don't know.
Right.
The other half are doing it because they need to be enforced.
Yeah.
So we don't need a staff that needs to enforce 100 people, 100%. We need a staff that can educate. I think this county staff does a pretty good job of education. I think if you combine that with the newspaper, you can educate people, the people that are gonna, not do things if they're told not to do them because they're right.
Yeah.
So
I think you're right. I think a ton of people just don't know.
Just don't know.
I mean, you just told me the burn barrel thing. I had no idea.
Nobody knows that one.
Yeah.
That's the most humorous thing in the world because I turned that person in 2005 and learned when I got the flyer that they'd been outlawed since 74.
Yeah. I didn't know that they were outlawed at all because, I mean, everybody uses those.
It's the reason, and let's educate the public. It's not because somebody didn't like a burn barrel. It's because they burn at really low temperature and the compounds don't burn and they stink and they're noxious and they're poisonous. And my neighbor would always light his when the wind was blowing away from his house. Made sense, right? It blew right to my house.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, I think that's true. I think a lot of it is just, it's not the burn barrel that's the issue. It's, there's a phrase that I've heard. I guess I won't use it here, but it's just, it's not the burn barrel. It's the person using the burn barrel and how they're using it. Just people thinking about everybody else around them. I mean, I'm sure I've done plenty of things like that in my life. Probably still do. People are like, what is that guy doing? And I'm not even thinking about it.
I think, Jason, when we talked the other day, you said you might want to talk critical areas, and it's a super segue into it because critical areas and enforcement are really probably where the public sees non-compliance. It's due to critical areas. It's not things like you need to use 2x6s at 18-inch spacing, right? They don't see any of that.
Yeah.
That's all done, safety, behind the scenes. But they see their neighbor dumping a dump truck into a creek. So the critical areas ordinance, just as historically for folks, what I read is when the Growth Management Act happened in the 90s, 1990s, sometime late in the 90s, and counties like ours were requested to put a plan together for their growth. At that same time, the critical areas ordinance was passed down from the state to the counties. And depending on how big the counties were, they could accept that responsibility or they could just use the state's resources. Lewis County elected to take care of themselves, much like we would expect Lewis County to do, that we would like to be independent. So we started putting together critical areas ordinances and learning them. At that same time, I moved here and I bought land out in Adna in 2006, I guess. And it was half filled with salmon streams and wetlands and steep slopes and every other critical area thing you could think about. So I got to spend a lot of time at the county learning about these things. But what I really took away from that is Lewis County jumped on board early. And they hired, there was an individual here on staff running the place named Lee Napier, who I learned when she retired how the respect she had from other people. And the reason she had that respect is she knew what she was doing when she got here. She was working down in Aberdeen, salmon recovery, everything I have dealt with, she was into like 15 years before I ever heard about it. So she came here and put this system in place, and we've benefited from her. And then she found her replacement, which is Mindy, who is another heavy hitter that knows what's going on. And so at the county level, in terms of critical areas, people might complain, but I would contend that we are quite sophisticated and we protect our critical areas very well. I did mention the 10%. I usually work on weekends, and sometimes things happen to critical areas. But I would say, by and large, the mandate from the Army Corps of Engineers is understood by most people, and that is that there will be zero net loss of wetlands. That doesn't mean you can fill them and use another one. It means zero net loss of wetlands. And that's where the United States is right now with wetlands, and that's where the county's at. So when you drive around and you say, hey, there'd be a great place to put a building, let's fill that wetland over there. Understand there's zero net loss. You have to create another wetland. That's what's happened at TransAlta. They invested millions at TransAlta to make wetlands. So when people want to fill a wetland around here, I say fine. Go buy the ones at TransAlta. They're about $25,000 an acre, and you can fill them. And you can run your dump trucks into any of these spots you want. Anyway.
Yeah. So being on the other side of that table, which is what I really like about when we get to talk, because I obviously do some building around here. And so here's my, because I agree with that. And I think all the builders that I know, or at least the vast majority, would like, they're not against any of those concepts. And it's sort of like the enforcement thing. It's not the concept that I have the issue with. It's how it's enforced and who gets to decide what a wetland is. And because there's things like, you know, there's a, I mean, so I've seen things where the only reason a field is growing certain things is because the county is diverting their stormwater onto somebody's property, and then it grows sort of like if that wasn't happening by an act of actual mechanics, then that wouldn't exist there. So how do you delineate between kind of these artificially manufactured wetlands? Because I mean, I
know where you're going,
and I don't know if you would agree with this or not, but you know, is there a difference between something that would be a naturally occurring wetland and something that's sort of artificial and in nature, or kind of? Do you know what I'm getting at?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
I'm happy to jabber on that topic.
So address that, because there's a lot of things like that where somebody's like, oh, I have like 2 cattails growing in my yard.
Right.
And now all of a sudden, if I want to build here because it's a category, whatever, I got to spend $250,000 an acre, you know, or whatever it ends up being, you know, because there's a bunch of math behind all that stuff. But, you know, to build an ADU on my property or whatever.
That's, you know, it's a really good question. Let me see if I can parse it out. First thing is, wetlands are defined by the Army Corps of Engineers, and anybody that gets a certificate as a wetland scientist fills out the same form to delineate a wetland. And that form is the Army Corps of Engineers standard. So every wetland scientist does the same form. The form allows you to look at 3 things for a wetland: hydrology, plants, and soils. You have to have all 3 of those things for it to be a wetland. I will tell you, as a wetland scientist, the easiest thing to see is plants, and you can go out there and quickly tell 90% certainty whether it's a wetland just by the plants. But you have to go through all of the science and delineate it as a wetland. You use the word delineate. Delineate is where you say the boundary of the wetland is. That's the delineation. From that, you buffer it. If that wetland is a very good wetland, it'll have a bigger buffer. But the edge of the wetland is not really up for debate. It's plus or minus 10 feet. For most wetland scientists, they can tell you where it is. Now let's get into what Jason talked about, and that is, once I know it's a wetland, and we argue about it being a wetland because it's in your yard, or it's impounded, what was that wetland really there, or was it created?
Yeah.
I go to paper mills, and there will be a steam line leaking on the ground, and it will create a wetland underneath the steam line that is about a 10 by 10 foot wetland with cattails, the whole thing. Right. There's in the code, it actually says, I think it's 1,000 feet. 1,000 square feet is not considered a wetland if it's not a mosaic of other 1,000 square foot wetlands. So there's a way to get rid of that small one. What's more troubling, I think, for most people is wetlands that are created by impoundments, like roads. If you go out North Fork Road or you go down Kresge, just go down Kresge, between Kresge and International, there's probably 30 acres of impounded wetlands in there. Now, somebody would argue that that wetland is only created because you put that road there. And that's why that wetland's there. So therefore, I should be able to fill it. But that's sort of a decades-long approach. If one backs it out to 150 years and thinks about George Washington walking over to Centralia, he had to walk those hillsides because he couldn't walk where Coal Creek is and the fairgrounds and any of that. You couldn't walk in any of that. It was probably all marsh and wetlands. So it's sort of that catch-22, right?
Yeah.
It is a balancing act of what you say, and that's why there are mechanisms to get past these things. But the one mechanism that does not exist is, I think it's a wetland, I'm just going to fill it on Saturday.
Sure.
That mechanism's not a very safe one to do.
No. I think one of the things that being on the planning commission that you kind of come to realize is that I remember when I first started, I thought I came home, my wife was like, so how is this planning commission thing? And I said, I'm getting a lot more grace for politicians, because if this is how they have to make decisions, like, no wonder they all seem crazy. Because I mean, there's a lot of times where we wish we had more access to information or could talk to more people, and sometimes you're restricted in those things. So there is sort of this thing where, in the interest of transparency and all that kind of stuff, which I get why you want to have that and why you should have it, but you get limited in how much knowledge you can actually accumulate on it. And so a lot of times you're just going, well, hopefully the things I've been told are true. I mean, how many times have we said that and then, had to vote on things? And so I think it's interesting how I wonder if most people in that kind of a space where you're voting on stuff just go home and go, man, I hope all the things that I was told were in the realm of true, because otherwise, like, I've made a terrible decision,
I've enjoyed the same interactions you have on that planning commission. I think I would tell the audience, one of the things I learned the most is, throughout my life, I like to surround myself around people that think like me. But there's a real problem with that if you do that, because they think like you.
100%, yeah.
And the Planning Commission has been, and this is staff that did this. I mean, in the old days, you didn't apply. People sort of found you. But where I'm going with that is the diversity in the county. If somebody like you and I are friends, but we are distinctly different.
Yeah.
Mindy's different. And that's the strength of that planning commission, is you have people like Frank down in South County, and Gretchen out in the east, and Roger up north. You as a developer, we had Spogan on there. It's really a good representative. And I was smiling this morning thinking about the conversation we're going to have here and the conversations that we've had, and what a benefit that is to those county commissioners.
Yeah.
That we've tested Mindy before she has to go and talk about it in front of them.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, no, I think that's one of the things that I have appreciated, and I think this is an important distinction. It's not just that we're different, but it's that everybody's been very reasonable, very willing to consider everybody else's viewpoint. And, I mean, we've had lots of conversations sitting right next to each other where you'll say something and I'll go, well, I'm just never going to get on board with that, or vice versa. And we can laugh about it, and it's not a big deal, and we don't have to hate each other. Yep. And I think that's one of those things that, there's kind of this idea right now that, diversity is our strength. And that, I don't believe that's true. I believe it's good to have diversity, but I think the strength is if you can have diverse opinions and then also be respectful to that stuff. You can separate out somebody's ideology from their personhood. People can think different ways than me. They can live different ways than me, and we can still be nice to each other. We can still not demonize each other. So there's, I think we just talked about this on the last episode, actually. There's an issue right now where people are convinced that how they think defines their identity. But ideas change. There's all kinds of stuff. I mean, we were talking about this last episode that things like we've just gotten so identity driven, and I think a lot of that's been fostered by a lot of politicians, because it does take people who are susceptible to that idea and kind of radicalizes them. So it happens on all sides of the aisle. I'm not even pointing fingers. I do think, there's times, depending, on how you look back, one side does it way more than the other or whatever. But I think it happens in every political group. And I think people have to get back to an idea where my identity doesn't come from the things that I think, the color my skin is, the religion, maybe it should from a religious standpoint more. But I think one of the most revolutionary ideas that we've ever rallied around is that, every person has value for no other reason that they were created by God. And so it puts everybody, no matter what you're doing, you have equal value. You don't get equal outcome, because your decisions determine some of those things. And sometimes you just start out, sometimes you are subject to some of the decisions your family's made before you. It may put you behind, it may put you ahead. But, you can't, it doesn't matter. Because you just are where you are, and you want to get to where you get. And I think the thing that's really great about, the American experiment, if you want to call it that, is that it does allow for people to transcend all that stuff. You see that all the time. People transcending those things. So I think a lot of our issues politically, and one of the things I really appreciate about our group, because I know, if everybody knew how everybody voted, everybody's voting all different kinds of ways, on all different kinds of stuff, and we've all been really close. We like each other. We're able to talk through a lot of these complex issues and come. I mean, how often did we not mostly unanimously agree on things?
I know. Thank you.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I wanted to really talk about that. Yeah. That unanimous versus dissenting opinions, because just what you were saying. I would say there's a fear of being on the outside, right? People don't like to be the one person that's saying, I just can't get on board with that. We've actually been rewarding people for being on one camp or the other, right? And the being in community with people, either being on a board or running for county commissioner or doing whatever, really makes you understand that everybody doesn't think like you.
Yeah.
And at 67, you go through life thinking everybody thinks like you. I'm just talking about me. And then you sit on a board and realize they don't. We were unanimous most of the time, but there were times, but that was because most of the decisions are like, do you want jelly with your peanut butter? Yeah, okay, we'll take it.
We're not dealing with complex social issues. Yeah.
But sometimes there was an issue like that. Yeah. There was an issue about a UGA or something. And I just really appreciated the fact that the one time or twice that I had an opinion about something that was against what everybody else had, it was so respectfully received, and we passed it up to the county commissioners so that they could. I don't know, if I were a county commissioner, I'd be more interested in the one person that had a problem than the 7 that.
I like that yeah, to that point, I like that if there was dissension, that it was explained when it was passed up. It wasn't just ignored. It wasn't just, oh, this passed.
Right.
And it was 6-1 or whatever it was. It's these 6 people passed it for this reason. And then this one person or 2 people, I think we did have one that was like 4-3 or something like that. And so the people that had their dissenting opinions, and that's the nice thing about being on an advisory board, because we're not actually, when we say vote, I mean, that's a generous term for what we're doing. We're trying to hash these things out. I say this all the time. I feel like our role is really to just take these things that come to us and beat them up every which way that we can, so that it's as fleshed out, the conversation's been as had as it can be on this thing, because the commissioners are making decisions on a million things.
Yes.
And so we're trying to, just beat this idea up every which way that we can, so when it shows up at their door, they're not having to do all that stuff. They can look at it and get through it fairly quickly without a bunch of research. They know we're not rubber stamping stuff. And so I do like that format.
I'd say the same thing holds for the commissioners. There's 3 of them. I'm always interested when the vote's not unanimous, right? When it's unanimous, I don't worry much about it. But if it's not unanimous, I'm interested. I'm interested in what that other person thinks. And it's never the same commissioner.
Yeah.
And so I have deep respect for those guys. And one thing I will say is, by sitting on a board, it has given me incredible respect for those county commissioners. They have a very tough job.
Yeah, no, I have a lot more grace for just everybody because it's easy to sit back and watch things and see how they play out and go, what an idiot. They didn't think about this or that. And it's like, now when you're on the front end of these things and you don't know if if people are telling you the truth, if they're lying to you, if they're leaving stuff out, and you're making these, you're voting and it's on the record and it says, well, so-and-so voted for this thing. And you're like, well, I didn't know. Well, and we talk about this all the time too. There's a gigantic chasm between the legislation or the stuff that comes through and then how it gets implemented on the back end. And so you can vote for things and go, well, conceptually, I think this is a really solid idea. And then it just gets implemented completely different than what you intended or thought. Yep. And it maybe is better. A lot of times it's worse, right? And so, being involved in that process, even just on the little, we're on the smallest scale I think you could possibly be on. So I don't want to overstate what we're doing. But, it's just given me a ton more grace for all politicians. I still, there's ideologies I think are better or worse, and not all ideas are good ideas for sure. But I think there is a lot of, I think people are maybe more well-meaning than we give them credit for.
Oh, I think that. The Planning Commission, I was just reading, I'm not on the Planning Commission anymore. I stepped off when my term ended last December. But I was curious as to how many people have applied for the 2 open seats on the Planning Commission, and was delighted when I read they're posted the applications of the 5 individuals. And I smiled for a couple of reasons. One is because there were 5 people applying for 2 jobs. I will say to you, thank you. That means we probably did our job well. We weren't so dysfunctional that people don't want to be on the Planning Commission. The other thing I'd say is that made me smile is knowing some of those folks, you think you're going to have this incredible impact. I had 2 or 3 things I came on the Planning Commission I was going to fix.
Yeah.
No, we don't get to really choose which items we work on. And as you just pointed out, we actually put up recommendations how to vote, and I don't half the time ever know what they decided because the commissioners decide that after me.
Well, and from what I hear, I don't know that they went a different direction than we did. They tweak things for sure. There's things that I know on certain things there was a lot more information that came out between when we made a recommendation and then when they hear it. So we're just kind of that first filter. And then I've thought like, well, man, if I would have known all that stuff when I was going to vote, I would have voted way differently. But that's just kind of part of the process. But then people will look back and go, what were those guys thinking? You know? And it's like, well, we only knew so much at the time. So, I think all that stuff's pretty funny. But yeah, I'm, obviously, it was awesome having you there. I like the only reason. So full disclosure, when I was when it was recommended that I apply to this thing, I thought, man, the last thing I want to do is be on some board because boards are usually just horrible. Like, I mean, if you've been on any of them, it's like a lot of just people who are there just because they want to go say they're on a board of something. And they're not actually there to do the job that's there to do. And they want to make it way more important than it is or not give it the attention it deserves kind of all at the same time. Mm-hmm. But what I've really appreciated is that, people don't miss, like, people in our group don't miss meetings. Mm-hmm. It's not this massively important thing, but I think everybody's pretty humble about it. They don't view it as something to put on their resume, I think, for the most part. They're just there to serve. And it's the only reason I've stuck around this long, because I thought if I get through a year, it would be a miracle, And it's actually been a nice group. And I think one thing that I know Mindy's talked about quite a bit that I know she's worked at is to get more community involvement in those things. Mm-hmm. And we did have a pretty good amount of community involvement in a lot of the stuff that we did. And it made a huge difference. Like, we want to know what people are thinking. We want to represent the people that we're supposedly, trying to represent. But if you don't hear from any of them, then you're just hearing from your circle, which mostly think the way that you do. Right. That's why you hang out together. So, I thought it was a really good group. I'm really hoping that, whoever fills your seat will bring that same kind of sensibility to it.
Well, thank you.
And, I always really appreciated that you were very thoughtful. You spent a lot of time reading the material, thinking through it before you got there. And I liked that your opinion was really different from mine because it helps flesh out the topic. I think every time we voted, we all felt like we got around the thing as much as you could because everybody has all these different areas of specialty and bring a lot of experience in a lot of different areas. And so we're really able to beat that stuff up pretty good and get the best kind of possible recommendation that we could. And I think everybody, for the most part, took it really seriously and tried to come and do the job, that it was. I
always, and then I'm happy to get off it, but it's interesting that like the learning point for me on there was I usually look at everything analytically, where's the data, and I'll snap to a decision. And as you mentioned, the diversity on that board, there was always somebody on that board that had the compassion and ear of the public that I normally don't carry. And they always brought it to my attention kindly that, hey, we're not thinking about this. And so, the 5 people that have applied, it's going to be another good board. It's going to be a good group.
Well, I hope so. So you like fish. How's that for a transition?
It's
so how did that happen?
It's probably the right transition because I knew nothing about fish, didn't care about fish, didn't need to know about fish. I bought some land in Adna, and it happened to have critical areas on it, but I didn't know that salmon ran through there. And I owned that property for 7 years, and I was developing it to keep from going broke. And so I didn't spend a lot of time in the critical areas on the salmon streams. And the conservation district came to me after I'd owned it for 7 years and said, hey, where's this salmon stream at? And I said, what salmon stream? And they said, well, it's over here somewhere. And somebody had wrecked it, and they wanted to refurbish it. But they told me there were salmon in that stream. And I said, there's no salmon in here. And they laughed at me. They said, they're here every November, Bob. Just come. And about 3 days later, my dog almost died from salmon poisoning from the day they pointed that out to me. But since then, I've become a real advocate for salmon because they are here. They fill every ditch and creek in the area in November, the coho do. And then we have plenty of other fish that run the rest of the season. So I became a real salmon advocate because they did a project on my property. And then, like we talked about originally, if you know nothing about something, you think you know a lot about it. It's called the Dunn-Kruger effect.
Yep.
And so a lot of people have a lot of opinions on things that are real strong, and they know nothing about them. And that was me and salmon.
I was just talking to somebody about this. Harvard did a study, I think it was, and there's this graph that they have about, kind of people's arc of understanding things. And so, and we talk, it's one of my favorite things to go through with my kids is, because I want them to feel like it's okay to try stuff and not be good at it, because that's how you get good at things. So the way it was always explained to me was that, when you endeavor to go out and do something, before you do that, you're unconsciously incompetent. You don't know what you don't know, right? And then you start to learn some things, and now you become consciously incompetent. You move. Now you know that you don't know stuff. And this is like the quitting zone. This is where people go, oh, man, like now but before that, you were full, all of the unearned confidence of a Kardashian, right? Like just, I know everything. So, and then, if you can get through conscious incompetence, which is like the quitting doubt zone, then you move into conscious competence, where you know what to do, but you still got to think about it all the time. Mm-hmm. And eventually you move on to mastery, which is unconscious competence. You don't even have to think about it. You're just operating in the zone. So that's kind of how it was explained to me. But this Harvard thing, they have this graph where you learn something a little bit new, and your confidence skyrockets on this chart, and they call that Mount Stupid in the study. And so, and you think back to your own life, like you learn like one revelatory idea, and you go, I know everything. You see this in like your teenagers and things like that, where you learn a couple new things and you become aware of something that really resonates with you, and you go, I'm the smartest man alive, and so we have so many people that just camp on Mount Stupid, and they don't continue on. And then, so the graph goes, well, then you continue on learning that thing. If you push through that, your confidence like drops like a stone. It goes way below the median, and it's like the valley of doubt. And there's this big curve where, that kind of conscious incompetence where you go, oh man, these things are way more complex than I realized. And there's so much, and there's people out there that know this to a deeper level. I don't know if I could ever get there, which people are watching this in real time on our show. Like there's so much I don't know. Like I remember reading a few books, early on and going, man, they're like, this is so great. And you're wanting to teach this stuff to other people. And then you start going on and learning more and more and exposing yourself to people who have mastered a lot of these things. You're like, I don't know anything. Like, I don't know if I'll ever know, a tenth of that stuff.
Reminds me of a time in Atsugi, Japan in 1985. I was walking to the first tee with my Navy buddy, and there was a guy standing there with his girlfriend on the tee. And we were cocky, as you might guess, naval aviators, living overseas, 28 years old. So I look at this guy and said, hey, what's your game? And he looks at me and says, "What are you thinking?" And I said, "Well, we always play for money. How about we just play a $2 Nassau front back and 18?" And he says to me, "Nah, I'm with my girlfriend. I won't get into it today." Needless to say, by the time we got to the second hole, I realized I'd really overstepped my bounds. I was way out over my skis. He was the golf pro and shot a 1 over that day, and I shot about a 14 over. And you're just amazed at how stupid you are sometimes.
For sure. So anyways, before I kind of took that trail,
I think that's a great trail. I would say I live on Mount Stupid, right? And here's why I say that. But I move off that.
Yeah.
But you've known me a long time, and I had a gal once, I sat in a room with about 35 engineers, and they did a Myers-Briggs personality survey. And 33 engineers were in one corner of that survey, and there were 2 of us in the other corner. And she didn't know who we were. She was just talking about what that means. Those 33 engineers in that one corner, they internalize thought. They think about what they're going to say before they say it. And then they say it. That's how all 33 of those people think. These other 2 people in the other corner, they think out loud. Whatever's on their head comes out their mouth. And I laughed in that room because she so clearly defined me.
Yeah.
Is I think out loud. You've been around me, and I process ideas. The problem with that is you're processing that idea and you're on Mount Stupid, right? You don't know anything yet. So people get a first impression of you that you're living on Mount Stupid, but you move off that. But I just say that from my personality type.
It is a processing. People process information all kinds of ways. I mean, I tend to be more internalized, and I usually have to be, in those settings, I usually have to be asked for my opinion. I don't really just say stuff. I'm trying to take all this in and think about it and be thoughtful. But I think it is kind of incumbent on people when they're in those settings to just realize that just because somebody's talking and saying things, it doesn't mean that's their final word on it. And that just kind of comes as you are around more different kinds of people. But you don't have to go like, the first thing that you say, if you're wrong, a lot of I've seen you do this, or people that have that same kind of process, they'll talk themselves out of things if you just let them go ahead and do it. And you don't have to jump in on every little thing and be like, that's not true or that's not right. Just let them go and let them figure it out. A lot of times they kind of get back around to the same spot that you're probably at, and you don't have to shut down the conversation or ruin a relationship because you couldn't be patient enough to just let them get through it.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure I've done this plenty of times. I'm not.
No, you're speaking. But I'm speaking to me right here on the patience part. I have a land partner who said this to me early on when I explained I think out loud. He said, "Bob, I learned with you right off the bat, unless you're asking me to sign a check, you're just talking."
Yeah.
And I thought that was the most intuitive thing.
Yeah.
And I guess I would add to what you're saying. The wise people are the ones that learn more what drives the other person. And I tend not to do that. I'm so in my own zone most of the time. But
yeah. No, I think it's a good word. I think it's, I do think most people are well-intentioned, and if you can just be patient, and I mean, I'm sure my wife's like, well, why don't you do that with me, or vice versa. But but it's something you always got to work at, because I don't think it's anybody's nature to be patient with people. It's something you have to do on purpose, and you got to do it every day, and you got to keep reminding yourself of the right things to do, and you just can't forget. And it's so easy to get sidetracked and kind of revert to your priors because at the end of the day, people are selfish. Like, we're all selfish. We all care about ourselves more than anything else, and you gotta move away from that consciously. You don't do it naturally. But anyways,
patience. It's mentioned in the Bible a lot. It's the virtue that I have to work on. It's the one that is certainly my weakness.
Yeah. Yeah. So back to the salmon. How did you? I bring this up every once in a while. You know, my favorite Rogan episode is this one where this guy's like a bat scientist. So one of my favorite ones I've ever heard because, and I mean, everybody's like, why would you care about that? But it was so interesting. I love nature. I love creation. It's so. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I love Washington so much. There's a lot of beautiful places out there, but I love the diversity of nature that we have, the kind of nature that we have. But I have never really thought much about the fish population. And I know you said you'd never thought about it until they got onto that. And there was one other thing I was going to bring up that we just learned, I think at one of our last meetings, but I've looked at the GIS map, and there's roads that are identified as fish-bearing streams because sometimes it floods. Have you seen that? There's one right by my house that it will flood. I'm right off that the Salzer Creek there, and so that will flood all the way, into the field behind our house, and it'll, cover the road completely. And that road is actually classified as a fish-bearing stream. And so kind of get into that with people because, some people will look at that and go, well, that's ridiculous. Yeah. And I thought that was like, well, how is a road a fish-bearing stream? But then somebody explained it to me that, well, it's not a fish-bearing stream all the time, but there's a potential for fish to go up in that. Yeah. And so maybe talk through some of those things and why that's important, and how do we parse that out with people trying to live their lives and build and do those things? Yep. Because, I mean, I also know another person. They've got this field below their house, and it's classified as a fish-bearing stream. I've never seen water in it one time. So how does that stuff happen? Because that comes up to me a lot because I get a lot of those complaints from people, and I resonate with it because I'm on all these properties with people, and they go, well, this is classified this way. I don't know how to get rid of it. I've never seen a fish in there. I've never seen water there. It's just part of my yard.
Usually, how do I get on? So, salmon. I mean, I had the same thoughts that when they told me that my property had salmon on it, it's 3 miles, probably 2 miles as the crow flies above Adna School up in the hills. And I said to them, there's no salmon here. And they said they're here every November. So then I saw them. And as soon as I saw them on my property, it was like a switch went off. They were like my kids, right? And so then I became passionate. They wanted to fix a stream on my property. What happened in the 70s, an old man wanted to farm his land, and he was going to make a hayfield out of this 2 acres. But a stream ran through it. So he just took his excavator out there, and he ditched around it and ditched it over into the woods. And so for the next 2017, for the next 40 years, the salmon had to swim across that 2-acre grass field in order to get up to the spawning grounds. I know this because when they came to me and told me that salmon stream was there, I went for a walk about 2 weeks later, and I was on my property up on the north end of it, and there was a huge beaver dam there. And I walked down the hill, I saw the beaver dam, and I saw that it had swung open. Beaver dams, the water gets around the edges, and they just swing open like a door sometimes. And this one had swung open, and I was standing there marveling at that. And here comes this coho swimming right through that water. Couldn't have been 2 or 3 inches deep where that dam had blown out on the storm, and now this coho was swimming through there. She swam across that 2-acre field. There was no stream. It was just reed canary grass, much like you see Salzer right now. So what has happened? So there's tons of habitat in Lewis County. All the streams have the salmon in them, whether it's Salzer, Dillenbaugh, Berwick. the Whatcom, Stearns, out in Bunker Creek. They're in every one of those creeks. And so what we have now is we've created, I say now, in the last 150 years since George Washington got here, he needed to farm, he needed to make cows, and so they cleared all the land in the bottomland. And it was all floodplain, but they ditched it. So if you go out, Stearns Creek, for instance, I think that's Lost Valley Road or Hidden Valley, but Stearns Creek is about a 3-mile straight ditch. I call it a salmon highway. My friends watch the salmon jump over the dams going up Stearns Creek, and they have to travel 3 miles before they get up into the spawning grounds. Some would say, well, what's the damage then? Well, all that bottomland was rearing ponds so that they would get their size before they would get washed out to the ocean. But we still have the spawning grounds up in the hills. So I guess what I've evolved to is the realization that the salmon have to get out of the Chehalis, and they got to run through all those, people call them ditches, right? They were a stream that was straightened. Coal Creek's one, Stearns is like that, Dillenbaugh's like that. Right now, the salmon don't have an objection to that. I'm not saying you get rid of and make those ditches into impenetrable spots, but we need to make those highways available to those fish to get through the Dillenbaugh. I mean, those of you that run down I-5, when you get on the on-ramp from Highway 6 and you look at Stan Headwall before you get off your exit, understand the salmon are blowing through that creek right there. That's Dillenbaugh and Berwick right on the right.
Yeah.
And they go straight down the middle of Interstate 5. They go up to the edge, and then they run through Interstate 5, down Interstate 5, and then they turn across the 2 industrial parks, and then the salmon are up there in the hills. And it looks just like salmon country up in the hills. It just doesn't look like it down in the flatland. So I guess you asked me my salmon passion. I've gotten into this communication thing. I've changed when people told me there were salmon there, and I believe I'm sort of normal and that other people will change if we show them the salmon. So that's really what I sort of work on is those salmon highways. It segues. We have a project right now. We're looking at Coal Creek. There's an 80-acre impounded area between the fairgrounds and that sporting goods store. And the salmon run right through there, and that'd be a great place to rewild that creek, if you will. It's not for anything else. You talked Sulzer out by your house. Sulzer Valley, if you go to the end of Sulzer Valley, the east end, and go up into any of that timber country, you'll clearly know there's salmon there. You'll walk in and immediately say, oh, there must be salmon in here. This looks just like a salmon stream. But if you go 3 blocks before you got there and look at Sulzer, you'd argue there's no salmon come through Sulzer. Now, we've made it really hard. We have farmed right up next to it, so we've killed all the shade next to the creek. We built houses right next to it on Kresge. But Sulzer still has a lot of potential. So
what, for the average person that's just going to work and trying to go on vacation, all this kind of stuff, why should they care about salmon? And is there because I think this is the big thing that everybody asks about everything is, well, what's in it for me? Like, how does this help me out? So what would be the benefit to the community to allow for these highways or to improve these highways? Does that open up potentially more land if you can create like larger freeways for the fish to go through instead of having so many little spots? I mean, I'm just kind of thinking with like developer, like a viewpoint, it's kind of like if you build I-5, now you don't have to have so much traffic on Jackson Highway or Highway 6 or 101 or whatever people used to use more frequently. So, or Centralia Alpha or any of these other roads. Now they can just go on this main highway, and that opens things up for more residential use and things like that. So I guess there's a few questions in there, but why should people care about, protecting salmon, and then is there something about restoring some of these spots that actually benefits the average person in the community?
Good questions. I think I would start by saying salmon are what I've heard called an indicator species. They are at the bottom of the pyramid. When we go to the schools and teach at the 4th grade level about our streams and take the water table in there, one of the slides we show is that there's like 130 species that eat salmon, right? At my property, it's the raccoons, it's the birds. So salmon tell us, like the proverbial canary in the coal mine,
I was going to say that, yeah.
What is going on in our environment.
Okay.
I don't think people don't need to look any further than the orca, right? The orca eat the kings, and the orca are having trouble because we don't have as many king salmon. Why don't we have as many king salmon? Because we don't have the habitat. So I think the big reason people should care is it tells them a heck of a lot about where they live and how beautiful it is. The other thing I told you earlier, I'm into industrial development just as I'm into salmon. So I have to deal with buffers, right? Whether I'm doing land development, I got a buffer, or whether you build a factory, you're going to have a buffer. These streams have been there for a long time, and they haven't been right where we say they are. Let's use an example. The Newaukum. People think the Newaukum runs where they see the water. If you're a geomorphologist and look at the Newaukum, you'll see the banks are in places hundreds of feet outside. The river, the bank full width is much more than the river itself. So I think that if you develop an awareness that this is a keystone species, it's there to show our environment, how good the environment is, and you let people know their salmon are running through there, then they're happy about, not happy sometimes because they want to put their house right on the river. They're okay with it. They understand if you tell them why. And so I think it's an educational step, right? I didn't know, and I'd owned one for 7 years. And
yeah.
So I think so the answer to your question is it's a keystone species. It will benefit them throughout the whole chain. And I will end with tourism. We're doing Coal Creek as an educational opportunity and an amenity for the community. And I think any person that has a creek in their house or near their house says it's an amenity.
Yeah, no, I mean, one of my favorite things to do, I mean, even if I'm, got to be on a call, I love just walking down Alvord. And I mean, there's beavers in there and nutria and mink, I guess, or I don't know anything. So maybe there isn't. Somebody will be like,
oh, there's beaver there.
But I've seen beaver for sure, and herons, and so I love just going down there, especially springtime. There's so many birds. There's so much stuff. It's my favorite thing to do is just walk down to the bridge there and just see what's going on there. But so. And that makes sense. I mean, it's I think when we lived in New York, the mosquitoes there are insane. They look like, some of them are like zebras. They're just these giant striped things, and they're super aggressive. But I remember we looked up one time, because my kids are like, why do we have to have mosquitoes? Like, why is that even a thing? And I thought, well, I guess I don't really know. And we looked it up, and that's essentially was the deal. It's like, well, everything eats mosquitoes. Oh. Like they're there and they reproduce so much because they feed all the other stuff.
Yeah.
And so that makes sense. I mean, I love orcas. I mean, I think they're just the coolest thing. Whenever, that you ever have that question asked you, what animal would you be if you could be an animal? Uh-huh. That's the one I pick all the time. What animal would you be?
I think I'm an eagle.
Eagle?
I'd
okay.
like to be an eagle.
Eagles are pretty awesome. My family took a trip to Canada when I was younger. Actually, I think Mike was on this trip with me too. But we ended up after they went home, we stopped and we did one of those like pontoon boat or not pontoon, but like the inflatable, like Navy SEALs use, those kinds of things. And we went around Vancouver Island, and there's that Eagle Island. You know which one I'm talking about? So there's this whirlpool that happens where all these currents are coming together in the ocean there off the islands, and there's this giant whirlpool that gets created. So all these fish get trapped in there, and they die because they can't get out. And there's this small island that has like thousands of bald eagles on it. I mean, it's not very big. It's just cover everything that like they can stand on or perch on is just covered, and they just go there all day and just pick up free food. And it's one of the coolest things I've ever seen. But yeah, we got to see, some dolphins, some orcas out there. It was awesome. But
as I was sitting here thinking about my desire to educate and protect the critical areas here and still do industrial development. And I just wanted to say that I was just on the Rogue River last week coming home from Arizona. And my buddies used to fish that Rogue like 20 years ago and catch 50 and 60 pound kings on the Rogue River. And I just think about what that says about the ecosystem, right? If you're carrying a 50-pound fish home, you're saying this place is really healthy. And where I was going with that is Oregon and Washington and every community struggling with the same thing we're struggling with. Is critical areas didn't get passed down to counties until 25, 30 years ago. So this is not something we've been ignoring. It's just we're learning. How stupid are we? How quick are we to get stupid? And the more we get that down in our other communities, the smaller towns that are doing their own critical area protection, the less we'll have to fix later.
Yeah. And so in your experience, I mean, when you bring this up with people, well, first of all, like on your property, when they came and said, "Hey, we want to do this project," obviously that's something that they're paying for.
What normally in that case they came in with most of the cash, and we as landowners had in-kind contributions like trees on the property. They needed them for the stream. We'd say take those down and use them. So we did not have to bring any money into the party.
And that's, I would assume, typical.
That is typical.
Yeah. Okay.
Right now, the big push over the last few years that everybody sees is culvert replacements and bridge replacements on the big interstates. So WSDOT's doing the big bridges, but the county's got lots of bridges. You're seeing them out on Bunker Creek Road. And
we saw a big crew over what is that out by Joppish area, that bridge as you're leaving the industrial park. I'm just having a brain meltdown, but when you're leaving the Centralia Industrial Park and you're headed out towards Galvin, what is that bridge that's there? Coal Creek or I don't know, whatever it is. But anyways, we saw a ton of county people out there working on that. I don't know what they were doing with the river, but
one of the big the Chehalis River Walkway is out by the Centralia water treatment plant. There's the Chehalis River Land Trust owns, 1,000 acres or hundreds of acres out there, and they do lots of training and planting and educational community stuff out on Galvin Road, right at the very end of Galvin Road.
Okay. So in addition to kind of trying to repair or recover these traditional routes, one of the things that I'm wondering, that was kind of the second question, like what is the big benefit to the community other than the natural resource stuff, having a healthy ecosystem, let's say? Are there other benefits to that?
Yeah, I think there's economic benefits. I've heard a lot of people say they're concerned about development in the floodplain and moving people out of the floodplain. And I think once you get the recognition that floodplain serves a pretty good function in certain places for these salmon highways, that one of the benefits will be the education to everybody, so that people won't be buying land, that has a stream running through it, thinking they're going to put their house on it, and then they go to the county and find out they got all kinds of problems.
Yeah. That is an issue. I mean, we see that, all the time. So I guess in that vein, just to throw it out there, I mean, I think I know the answer to this, obviously, but if people are looking at land to purchase, because I think this is a really good thing for people to know, especially in places like this where the amount of critical areas and the amount of buffers and restrictions are pretty high because of the topography of where we live. What should people do when they're considering buying a property, especially if they want to build on there? Like, what do you recommend before you spend a bunch of money on land that you may not be able to use the way that you think?
That's a really good question, because in the old days, I say old days, 15 years ago, there were two major ways to break up a piece of property, and that was either do a short plat of it or a simple segregation. Those are distinctly different. And when you do a short plat or a long plat, as you know, you have everybody looking at it on the front end to make sure.
Can you define what those words are? Because I don't think anybody has any idea.
Well, let me back up a little more.
What is a short plat? What's a long plat?
This is, it gives me an opportunity to really, the salmon highways, how did they get created? Well, timber companies have no use for land that doesn't have any timber on it, right?
Right.
So you oftentimes see timber companies log and then cut off a piece of property that is, say, close to Salser Valley, right on the edge, right on the hill. And they go, you know what? We don't want to deal with those buffers anymore. Let's just sell this piece of property, these 15 acres right on the edge of this hillside, and we'll keep the rest of it. Well, once they do that in Washington, if they break up 100 acres, used to be able to break it up into 20-acre parcels, and you don't need anybody's opinion for that. So if I own 100 acres and I want to, if it's zoned forest, you can break it up into 20 acres. And once you get it down to a 20 acres, then you can break it into the different lot sizes. This is how we did it. We bought three families bought 100 acres, and we just took 20 acres apiece, and we started doing short plats because the houses needed to be on the hillsides because we had too much wetland. And so we said we would do a cluster subdivision. So to do that, you do a short plat. 20 acres, you want 4 houses on it, you can do a short plat. When you do that short plat, everybody looks at it, and you can't even sell those until you have the road in, right? And the road's the really most expensive thing to put in any of these places.
Yeah.
So you got to have the road in. The county won't let you sell those lots until that road's in. So they have total control over where you put that road and how good a quality it is. There's another way to develop in Lewis County, and it's called a simple segregation. You can take that 20 acres and break it into 4 or 5 acre parcels, exactly 5 acre parcels, not 4.98 and 5.02. They have to be exactly 5 acres. And when you break those up, you can do that simple seg, and you don't have to ask anybody's opinion about anything. You just have the surveyor cut it up. I think the county now actually looks at them for critical areas to try to direct you correctly before you sell it, how to get the road in there. Because you asked, what does somebody need to be aware of? If your property was put together and you're buying it and it was made on a simple seg, let the buyer beware. You better go down to the county and ask them to pull it up and talk to you about that for the critical areas and the roads and all that kind of thing. Because what happens, this used to happen, I'm sure it still happens. The first person on that buys 5 acres from somebody that does a simple seg puts a 12-foot driveway in 100 feet long. And the next person that buys 5 acres from him adds to that driveway. It's 12 feet wide. He just adds another 100 feet. And the third person that buys in has to widen that thing out to 22 feet and make it a foot deep because now it's 3 cars or better. And so that fight happens 7 years down the road from when the guy short platted it and walked away from it, right?
Yeah.
And that landowner has no he's on his own to get that all done.
Yeah, and that's an expensive thing to not know.
Very expensive. Now, I will say, as you know this, there was a lot of crappy properties developed in Lewis County over the years that were done before you had GIS and before you had global information systems and ways for people to look at your property. And they created these parcels that wouldn't be created now, but they're out there in Lewis County. And those are non-conforming parcels. But there is an expectation in Lewis County that you can build on it. They don't say just because it's non-conforming you can't build on it. However, however, you need to do it legally.
Yeah.
And if it's in the floodplain, then you're going to raise it up 3 or 4 feet if they let you raise it up in the floodplain. But they're trying to get to yes is my point. So if you're one of those people that sees a really good price on a piece of property, you really should go to the county and ask them to go through it with you and maybe point out some of the problems.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a newer thing as well, the cultural resource maps. And I don't know how much of that you've run into, but this is another thing that I would love for people to just know a little bit more about, because it's a newer thing and it's a big deal. But the challenge with that is that you can't know that they're there until you apply for a building permit. Did you know that? Well, so if you don't know, and I'm certainly no expert on this, but if you don't know what the cultural resource mapping is, it's Native American archaeological maps where they believe that stuff was there, that they want to document it. But best I understand it, they want to know it's there. They're not looking to take it out. They just don't want it damaged. They want to record it. And so I actually talked with Mindy about when she was in Portland, they had found, I think, like a village that was way underground at this point. It just had been sedimented, washed over it for however many, hundreds or thousands of years. So they and this was at the airport when they're expanding the airport, which that shuts you down. So it gets real expensive. But the way that it worked was that they recorded it, they figured out what it was, how much was there, all that stuff, and they allowed them, because it was far enough below the building surface, to just build right over top of it. And so that was kind of the idea. And I've asked some of the folks that have come out, because we work with some of those folks on some of these projects, and their goal, it seems, as far as I understand it, is just to know it's there and to record it, so that just for posterity, just if anybody ever wanted to know. But if you, so that being the backstory of it, the reason that the maps, or the reason that's been given to me, is that they're confidential, is they don't want people going out there and digging stuff up. Mm-hmm. Fair enough. All that to say, though, if you're going to buy a piece of property, especially if it's within 1,500 feet of a river, it's some cheap insurance to go in. You can and I've talked to Mindy about this. You can go in, apply for a master site plan review of a property that you don't own, and you can say, hey, I'm thinking about buying this piece of property. I want to put the house here, or I'd like to, if I get to build it, I'd like to, and then you can apply. Like, these aren't things that the county's enforcing, obviously, and the county doesn't know what the maps are either. They have to send it out. I think it goes to all the various tribes, and they compare it to the maps that they have, and they go, hey, by the way, this section of your property falls in our resource mapping, so if you want to build a house there, we have to come out and we have to inspect that. So there's a lot of things, learn to use the GIS map, or you can, like you said, just go in and talk to the county. I know that's something they're always working to improve, is kind of their counter customer service presence, to be, more helpful, more knowledgeable about all these things, how to be able to direct people, because there's a lot to contend with out here. And you don't want to buy a piece of property, like you said, oh, I saw this beautiful piece of property. It was like 40 grand. It's 20 acres. It's like, well, there's probably a reason. You should dig into that more before you just spend the money. I mean, even if it's a lot of money, dig into that, because you want to know that what you want to build, you can build, and it's really expensive if you don't know all these factors. And so even if it costs you, a few $100 to apply and do a master site plan review on that property, that's cheap insurance to know that when you purchase this place, you can actually do what you want.
I think that you bring up a really good point that should be plugged, and that's the master site review. 15, 20 years ago, when you were doing something, you'd go into the county and they'd say, you need to do this, and you went home and did it, and then you came back and they'd say, now you need to do this. But when Lee Napier came in, I mentioned they started looking at their process, and they created that master site review. So when you go in there and talk to them about a piece of property, they'll pull that out. It costs $200, or it did cost $200, and they'll check off those things. You're going to need a wetland survey. You're going to need a steep slope engineer. You're going to need, buffers from the creek. You may need the cultural thing. It's a really good, safe way. I mean, going back to your question, what does a homeowner do? If you're writing a check to somebody without going to the county first and asking about that, it's let the buyer beware.
Yeah. Yeah, no, this is not the old days where, I mean, we've updated properties, and I mean, it was the Wild West out here for a really long time. We didn't bother a whole lot with things like rules or standards in this county and in the cities. I mean, the amount of things that we come across, if we're in the ground, that just somebody threw a secondary line direct bury in the dirt, like 18 inches under. I mean, there's stuff that you come across that people just did whatever they were going to do, stuff that runs places that, I mean, it's pretty crazy. So that's kind of the other, the libertarian mentality. It's like, well, I don't need, like, this will be fine for me. I don't need to tell anybody about it. I'm just going to do this thing. I mean, I've gone into public works before and tried to get, any kind of mapping on, is there a septic system on this site, or, do we know where the sewer line comes off? And I've literally been handed, and this isn't their fault, just to be clear, but I've been handed things that look like somebody drew it with a crayon on a napkin and said, well, this is all we have on record for this property, and you're like, how is that possible? But there was a long time where that's how things were. It's just, they just let everybody kind of do whatever they wanted to do out of this idea of, we're a small town. I want to leave people alone. They want to be left alone. Yep. And we kind of did that, and I get people get annoyed that, like, well, why should I have to spend $200 or $400 on a master site plan before? I'm not arguing whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but them's the rules. That's how it works. And so, you can be annoyed at how everything works all the time, which I get. I'm frequently annoyed with how things work. However, that's not real productive, and you gotta, if you want to play a game, you gotta learn the rules. That is how this stuff works right now. If you don't like it, get involved. Come to meetings, tell them you don't like it. That stuff's always good, but yeah, it's becoming more and more complicated. And I'm not advocating that all of that's good. I think there's a lot of really terrible stuff. I mean, I bring this statistic up all the time, but I think I sent it to you, and I can't remember what it is, but it's like $135,000 of the average home cost of the average new home build is regulatory expense in one form or fashion. So I think it's like 23% of every home build is from regulatory stuff. It doesn't go into a wage for a worker, not a nail, not a board. That's pretty crazy. And so I think regulation does need to be addressed in Washington. It is, from what I understand, and I've built in a few other places. I have friends who build all over the country. From what I understand, we're one of the most difficult places to build anything anywhere. And so all that comes with a cost. And so some of that stuff, I think, should we protect natural resources? I don't think anybody would say no, but I think we have to do it in a way that doesn't always, like California, you can't always prioritize, fish over people. Like, you've got to be able to find a way. And this is something I really appreciated about our dialogue, is that I think we both can appreciate the thing that the other person's more engaged in, and that there is a way to do both. And so there's a way to find out how to do both of those things. You don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater on everything. And so I think that's a big part of the conversation with this stuff with people is, like, all right, I don't want to kill fish, but I also can't afford to lose, my butt on this property. I can't, I still want to live in a house here. And so trying to thread that needle is a challenge, I think. And so how do you square that as somebody who's kind of, wetland biologist, or I don't want to misstate what you do, but, like how do you square that?
That's a good question. I keep coming back to this idea that, we're this libertarian, we want to live free or die, sort of like New Hampshire here. But I heard somebody say once that your freedom ends where at the tip of your finger, where it touches my nose.
Yeah.
That's where it ends. And it makes me think about this light pollution that we talked about, right?
Yeah.
Is that I don't want that regulation. I don't think you should have to write that regulation. But by gosh, if my neighbor's going to put a spotlight on my house and he's not going to listen to me to take it away, then how come his finger gets to come all the way into my bedroom and shove his light in my bedroom?
Yeah.
Right? And I go, I got to be able to have that conversation. It's like, it's okay. I understand your property rights. But at some point it has to go. Your question was about salmon. I think, just as you said it, I think that comment you just made about California is there's hard problems now, right? We've created something and you can't just back out of it. The solution has to be both of us talking. And just because I put a caveat on the solution that any solution we make has to be free to me, well, that's not, no, we're still debating what that is, right?
Yeah.
How much say you get in that? And so I think people do need to be engaged. I think we can do both. I speak at industrial things as well as I speak at salmon things, and I say the same thing to both of them. It's not one or the other.
Yeah.
We're going to do both in Lewis County. We're going to develop, and we're going to bring jobs in, and we're going to protect the critical areas. And yeah, there's some cost associated with that. But as I said, I've just traveled in some places that aren't anywhere near as beautiful as what we live in. And for me, I'm willing to think about doing both those things together. It's not one or the other, it's both.
Yeah, no, I think that's ultimately the solution. I mean, liberty is always a messy proposition anyway. I think that's one thing that as I talk to people that I always come back to is that it's just, if you're going to live in community, I mean, just think about your own house. If you're going to live with a spouse and your kids, there's all kinds of messy stuff you got to try to work through as people, so that's not just limited to a family. You got to, if you're going to live in community with people, it just can't be your way or the highway. There's a lot of struggle and sometimes some hurt feelings, all that stuff, that it's just a messy deal to try to get along with everybody. And it's a lot of hard work. And, this whole idea that, well, environmentalists are stupid, or, developers are just, greedy and, don't care about the environment at all. Like, that stuff is by and large not true. Like, those are caricatures of those individual things. And I think, again, most people are much closer together than they are far apart on that stuff. And so then it just gets down to haggling out how do we actually accomplish both things in the way that's most doable for the other, you know? And are people tied to being a zealot about it? You know, like, I can't give an inch on the environment, or, you know, I'm not going to pay 1 red cent for like this other thing. That stuff just doesn't get us anyplace ultimately. And so, yeah, I think just as a general, I mean, a lot of this I'm kind of thinking about is not just this particular topic, but all the topics that we deal with. It's, you know, we got to do this if we're going to be in community with each other. So kind of wrapping that part of it up, I am interested in a lot of the energy stuff. I know I've talked with Commissioner Brummer about some of this stuff in our workshops that we've had. I know he's interested in the energy stuff around here. I'm really interested in what this area can do with energy. And so being that you know a lot about this biomass process, tell me a little bit about how you got into that and where you see that fitting in with our economy here, and what the benefits are. Because I don't know that a lot of people know that much about it at all, actually.
Well, thank you for asking the question. I'm very passionate about it. I spent my life working in the pulp and paper industry, so that's in the woody biomass sector. It's probably at least as long a topic as the one we've had, so I'll be brief and tell you what I know about it. Is the Pacific Northwest has been in the biomass business since before George Washington got out here, right? We've been cutting trees and using them to build houses and make paper and make bark for your yard and burning the bark as energy. We've been in the biomass business our entire lives, so it's not something new. The reason we got discussing it here as a local community is we grow the trees and we have the biomass, but we're losing the industries that use that biomass. What do I mean by that? Pulp and paper. Tacoma, Simpson-Tacoma paper used 2,000 tons of wood chips a day. That's somewhere on the order, and that's bone dry tons. That's somewhere on the order of 100 chip trucks a day ran to Simpson-Tacoma. Those were coming out of every area within 100 miles of Simpson-Tacoma. As soon as they shut that mill down, they lost 2,000 tons a day, went on the market. And when you do that, you crush the pulp market. So our friends that own small lots of timber, one of them is he owns a lot of timber, but he said this to me when that mill shut down. He said, I no longer sell trees, I sell logs. I said, what are you talking about? And I've been in the business. What are you talking about? He said, Bob, I can't sell the pulpwood anymore. The top of the tree isn't any good anymore because Simpson-Tacoma shut down. So I can sell a log, but now my land's worth, 80% of what it was before. So in Lewis County, 3 years ago, on advice from the University of Washington, we applied for and received a grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture to study how much biomass was available within 75 miles of TransAlta. And when that study was complete, what we had was the very first biozone created in the United States for woody biomass that was rated as high as it was rated. What that showed us is we had 600,000 bone-dry tons. That's take all the moisture out of it. That's 1.2 million green tons sitting on the landings and being wasted. It was either rotting in the going to carbon dioxide, which is worse than a lot of things, or the mills like Hampton out in Randall and Hampton and Morton, they couldn't sell their pulp anymore. You drove by them, they had mountains of that stuff in the back. So what we decided to do in Lewis County is recognize that and use it as a tool. economic engine to let people in the biomass sphere. These are people that make pellets, they make energy, they make nanocellulose, they make paper, they make all kinds of things out of wood. To let them know, if you're going to do that, you need to do it in Lewis County. And we've been very successful. The Alliance of Lewis Counties had a lot of business interest since we blew the horn and said, bring it here. We've got the biomass. We've got the DNA in our people to do it. And we have a community that wants business. So that's why the commissioners are really, they keep their ears open. They go and see these companies when they come in. We're looking to entice jobs to come to the area.
So, and I'm one of these. So, how does that work? So your people are logging, and what are we talking about? Branches and treetops and stuff like that. That all gets chipped up, essentially, dried out, or what is this process, and how do you take that and turn it into energy?
Mm-hmm. Well,
and how much energy are you getting? Because this is, I've been really critical of the wind farm stuff,
mm-hmm.
and a lot of the even kind of the solar farm stuff. It's kind of touted as this environmentally friendly source of energy, and it's really ineffective. It's really expensive, and like cradle to grave, it's actually much worse than most energy sources. Just you can't recycle the blades. You can't. They kill all kinds of large birds species that can't reproduce quickly. That stuff never gets talked about because there's a ton of money in the like green industrial complex, if you want to call it that. Mm-hmm. So how is this different from those kinds of things that they've gotten the faucet of taxpayer money turned towards them, and they're not producing, they're not actually environmentally friendly. It's been kind of a gigantic boondoggle of a thing. What is this? How does this process work, and how is it different from that?
Well, those are new technologies that the energy companies seem to have taken a segment out of. I just told you I drove through Arizona and I saw more wind farms and solar farms down in that area than right next to Hoover Dam. I mean, thousands of acres next to the dam in wind farm. This is different. What I guess I'm going to come back and say, this is woody biomass is in the DNA of the Pacific Northwest. It's what we grow. It is our crop. It is 100% renewable. It's 100% sustainable. We're going to grow it again right after we take that. So it's a renewable product. It doesn't really require a ton of capital before you start getting a benefit from it. So what are these products? You grow timber, you log it, you pull it to the landing. Some of the limbs are left down in the woods, but a lot of them are up at the landing and the butts and the tops. Our study showed that there was 100,000 bone-dry tons at the landing within 75 miles of TransAlta. 100,000 bone-dry tons at the landing. All you got to do is pick it up and bring it somewhere. So that's pretty.
So you're talking like, as you're driving around town and you see somebody has logged a piece of property and these mounds of stuff.
Yeah.
That's what you're talking about.
Well, I'm talking about the ones that are right next to the roads that they're making going in. Leave the ones out in the field. Don't spend a lot of diesel pulling it in, but you got the landing sitting right there.
Yeah.
Easy to get. And we actually have 12 tub grinders in Lewis County. So there's already people that can do this. They just set the grinder up there and blow it into a truck, and then it goes somewhere. So you got all that wood. You also have the chips. So when all that wood goes to the sawmill and the housing market's really booming, a log's round, right? And a board is square or rectangle. So you have all that rounded wood.
Yeah.
That's called the residual wood, and that's what they chip up. And it's a very high value because it's clean, it's the right size. Paper mills will really want it. But when we gave up reading newspapers and we shut down all the newsprint mills in Canada and the United States, all those chips are like on the market. When we give up printing and writing grades, or Simpson-Tacoma shuts down, you have 300,000 bone dry tons of chips that's a useful product. They made it at Hampton and they want to sell it to somebody. So there's all that available in Lewis County. And there's 200,000 tons of pulpwood, the tops of the trees that are just being left in the woods to rot. Let's make sure everybody understands when we leave it in the woods to rot, it's bad. That goes to methane. That's like 100 to 1 worse than carbon monoxide for tying up ozone. So
and it's a fire issue.
Oh, there's fire. The east side deals the fire issue. That's what they argue. On the west side, it's just a purely economic thing.
Yeah.
Is we're letting this stuff rot and we own it.
Yeah, but you go to those drier areas, not clearing that stuff out, not having a plan for that, because this has obviously been a big topic that I don't think people totally get, and probably more in this area they do, but nationwide, why there's so many more fires than there used to be. Mm-hmm. And I tell this story all the time. I remember as a kid, like seeing crews along I-5 clearing brush, doing controlled burns, all that stuff. Obviously, we don't do that anymore. Mm-hmm. They've outlawed a lot of that stuff because they want to leave nature, untouched. Well, now you have all this dry stuff and it catches fire. I think this is an interesting thing. I'm talking to somebody who's an arborist, and they were talking about how this idea that nature is most healthy when people aren't involved is terribly incorrect. That nature and people nature needs people to tend it. If you don't prune an apple tree, it will kill itself. Mm-hmm. You have to keep on top of those things. It can't prune itself. It doesn't just drop these things off. So there's a lot of things in nature that require people's involvement to keep it healthy. So, I don't know. That's a topic I would love to get into sometime with somebody. We don't have to necessarily do it here, but just to kind of dispel that idea that people are the problem with nature. Now, people can be a problem, mm-hmm. but they're not the problem. The reason that nature has all kinds of issues, is not entirely because of people. There needs to be human involvement in a lot of these things for it to be the best that it can be. Yep. And I saw this other really interesting study. I don't know if we want to look this up, but somebody did a study on how much if you had to pay people to perform the tasks that bees do, how much money it saves us to have bees do all these things for us. And it was like some crazy amount of billions of dollars. So there's stuff like that all over the place. And I think it would be wise of us all to be a little more measured about this stuff and go, well, nature performs a lot of services for us that we don't have to pay them to do. They're going to do it on their own. We just got to not screw it up. And then on the other side, that nature does need us to tend and, tend the land, to be good stewards of it and to not be disconnected, but to be engaged in ways that, as we learn more about it, are actually fruitful for the land. And there's a symbiotic relationship there that I think is beneficial for both.
Well, fortunately, we have visionaries in this country, and many of the things that we're working on now were triggered by investment, 10, 20 years ago by the U.S. government, whether it was in research at the University of Washington or Oregon State or Washington State. But going back to this biomass, I think the important message for Lewis County is we're not rolling up and giving up because people aren't building houses or making paper. We're going to find other uses for that biomass. For instance, there's an insulation company coming to Lewis County that's making, they're in New York now, and they're building a factory here, and they're going to make insulation with wood from the mills, right? It comes out of their waste streams at the mills. But there's that whole market, right? The paper mill's it's been an expense on their ledger for 30 years. And if it can go to something they sell for $1 a ton, it makes them a fortune, right? From the expense side. There's a company that came and talked to us about making hydrogen from woody biomass.
Okay.
Well, we're already putting a hydrolyzer out in the industrial park to make hydrogen. What if we made it with woody biomass right next to that? We'd have more visitors from the world coming to see us making hydrogen in Lewis County. So, those that poo-poo hydrogen, I'm not ready to throw that baby out yet. You know, we're going to run with that until it drops. There's people that you originally talked about energy. Is there a way to take that woody biomass and make energy? What we have found is the economics are not there yet.
Okay.
You're not going to burn that million tons.
Doesn't pencil yet.
Doesn't pencil.
Okay.
Because what power is, I know people don't like to hear this, but energy is so cheap in Washington, you can't make it pencil out because of the damn energy. But so there's the energy component. There's fancy products like University of Washington has developed nanocellulose. They're getting 10 to the minus ninth. Papers made with 2 centimeter long fibers. Nanocellulose is 10 to the minus ninth of a meter. It's very, very small. You can't even see it. But they have found it has great properties for oil resistance. So right now, when you go buy your Chinese food and they put it in a paper tray, it's got PFAS all over it, these forever chemicals that go in the environment and in your body. Well, we want to get rid of PFAS. It's one of the major things in the United States. Do I expect people in Lewis County to know about it yet? No. Right? Some of them know PFAS is bad, but the U's already working on that. And if we can do that with wood, then you got a really cool project. And I'll leave with this. If TransAlta puts in those steam turbines like they're talking about and running natural gas out there, and there's a byproduct of those turbines, and it is low pressure steam, you're going to see all kinds, we hope, of little businesses, like cottage businesses with wood, go in around that steam plant because that steam's free, right?
Yeah.
They'll sell it or they'll pump it into the atmosphere. But I think woody biomass is the future. It's one of the futures for Lewis County.
So what you're saying, if I'm hearing you, is that there's a ton of potential there, but we haven't quite figured out how to use it to make money yet, or especially when it comes to energy. Well,
what we've done is we went to the USDA, we created the Biozone. The Alliance of Lewis County uses that as a vehicle, a marketing vehicle. And then we're seeing the companies from around the world come here and ask questions. Hey, would you be willing to put a hydrogen plant in here? How about, now we want the ones that bring money that you and I don't have to pay for, right? If I have to buy them, then I don't really want to do it. You did mention something that I want to take a second and explain my belief on this. Sometimes when a company comes in, and let's say they invest $100 million, that's a typical number for a company, $100 million. It takes them 2 years to build that factory, and they're investing that $100 million. Those of you that are going into development know there's a cost associated with that. 7% on that $100 million a year. Let's do it rough. Call it $14 million.
Yeah.
So don't be surprised if the state kicks in $10 million to put a factory there. All they were doing is covering the guy's interest until he gets running, and then after that, he's on his own. So I hear a lot, well, we don't want to spend any money on getting that company here and standing them up. I'm not saying we're going to do it for 10 years. I don't want any company coming that I have to subsidize.
Right.
I want companies I want to subsidize them to get them here.
Yeah.
And then they're on their own.
Yeah. So, and just besides the jobs and all the, I mean, this is a whole different discussion I'll have with somebody else some other time, but there's so many layers of taxes that you get out of this stuff. There's people that are, buying their gas, they're buying their groceries, they're, renting or owning homes. There's the tax that the business pays. There's a lot of revenue that comes in from stuff like that. So I think, yeah, if people, can get past the kind of clickbait headline on a lot of this stuff of like, oh, we're spending $10 million to get this company in here. Well, people do this in their regular life all the time. Well, I'll spend X amount of money to buy an investment, gold or Amazon or whatever you want to buy, because I expect to get a return out of it eventually. And so if we're able to frame those, and not like in a deceitful way, but if people can understand that, it's not just that we're going to subsidize this for 2 years, it's that we on the back end are going to get something like this. And I see this at some of these meetings we go to where people are really against a thing, and we have a little more insight on how it will play out long term because we've been around it, not because we're smart or any of that stuff, just we've been around it, seeing these things play out, and they don't really get the vision. And I don't know that we're very good at selling the vision of what it will be long term. We don't give a lot of projections. People really shy away from that in the government, saying, well, we're going to spend this much money and we hope to get X, Y, and Z out of the end. They don't want to be held to anything, so they just go, well, maybe we'll get something. And it seems too nebulous. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. I feel like that happens a lot, and people get really bent out of shape because they feel like, well, what's in it? It's that thing. Well, what's in it for us? We're going to have this thing here. What do we get out of it? It's going to be more truck traffic, or we're going to have this big building there that wasn't there before. It was just a field, and I like the look of the field better than the building. What am I getting out of it? What can we do as far as being able to get this stuff out to the community so they can actually understand what the full picture will look like? I mean, what would you say?
We've done 3 conferences on biomass for the last 3 years. We've done them. And the newspaper covers them. The elected officials are there. But the public, really, sadly, you're standing on the rooftop shouting, and people don't listen. I'm smiling because I'm thinking of like the city just did this annexation thing, right? And I read about people being upset, fire departments and all that stuff, but I'm thinking, man, I thought they did a pretty good job. They had a lot of meetings I went to, and but still, you don't get to some of the people, right? And they still have, which is okay. They deserve it. So you ask, what would you do? I think you can't over-communicate. You got to take guys like me who are ready to find the solution and build it and slow that thing down and vet it like we do on the planning commission, and leave it out there and let people throw rocks at it till you think you got them all, and then you wrap it up like the city does, and you'll still get a few rocks. But you've done your best.
Yeah, and I mean, how much of this disengagement that we have just across the country, really, I mean, where we just don't know much about how much works. How much of that do you think is just kind of one of the issues of things going so well? I think about this a lot, like the issues that come with prosperity is that, well, when you don't hunger, you don't really need for anything. I mean, and I know there's people that that have less than others, but if you look through history, you look at the world currently, the poorest in our country have it so much better than the average person across time and space, for sure. I mean, there's people that are making minimum wage that have better lifestyles than the richest person from 500 years ago. So we've made massive strides. And so how much of that do you think is even solvable until there's real problems that necessitate people paying attention? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you know, because if you could go to one of these meetings that sometimes I don't go to everything either, or barely anything, but like given the choice, most people are going to watch Netflix and not go to a town hall of something, even if it actually has an impact on their daily life. Like they just don't. Things are too good.
Yes, there's a lot of that. I was going at it a different take. It's one thing I've realized is it doesn't matter how good it is, somebody's not going to like it.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
And somebody's going to wait, and there's going to be the person that likes to be the one that asks those questions at the end. So part of me, viewers wouldn't like this one. I'd just say, you do the best you can, and then just take those people with a grain of salt, right? I'm not saying they would have won the one last week, right? They didn't win this one this week, but they won the one last week and the week before that because they're prosperity, right?
Yeah.
And they have one thing. And you've sat on the meetings, and this is the one that really bugs me is when somebody stands in front of me and says, you don't know what you're talking about and you don't care.
Yeah.
You saw me almost blow up over that
Yeah.
one. That was the one that sent me over the top, is like, no, I do care. And I know quite a bit about this stuff.
Yeah.
But
yeah. That stuff's funny. Obviously we've been at meetings where people are like, they think that we're sitting on this volunteer planning commission just doing this solely because we care. We're not getting literally anything out of it. I think I've joked like the only thing I've ever gotten out of this is like
Cheetos.
Cheetos and an old granola bar, but people have this perception that somehow we're making money off stuff, or that there's some big conspiracy like that it has to do with something else. Like I always think that stuff's pretty funny. But yeah, obviously, I don't know. I guess I won't belabor that point, but it is funny. I just, it would be nice. And I guess here's another question I have. Do you think, because I look at this and I look at kind of the boomer generation, and there's like these generational things, there's my generation, generations behind us. They view the world really differently. They grew up in a different world. So do you think there's an element where there was so much money to be made during the boomer generation's prime earning years that they sort of, and things were running along well enough in the government that a lot of the most productive people stepped out of even caring about what happened in the government for a big chunk of their life during those peak earning years, and kind of abandon our institutions. And I'm not even blaming them for it. I'm not saying it's wrong, but just this is a theory that I have that, things were, money was just so available during a certain period. Not that every year in the 80s was great, but there was a lot of available money. Things were flowing. The economy was good. How much of that do you think kind of ended up getting us to this place where it was like the least capable people were running the government because all the most capable people were out making money during their prime earning years? And now I'm seeing, one of the things I've said I'm really heartened by is that I'm seeing people now more recently, and this isn't any kind of indictment on people who were here before, but people who could make a lot more money not serving in these positions, who are doing it because it feels like it's getting a little out of control, just nationally, locally, all in all ways. And I know several people who are making their personal lives worse to go serve in some of these positions out of service. And it's the worst job. People just, no matter what you do, everybody tells you you're an idiot and you don't know what you're doing and you're terrible. So they're doing this, because they care. I've been heartened to see that kind of return to public service from some of the more capable people that I know. So throwing that theory out there. Like, what do you think of that? Is that just totally?
Well, I think the baby boomer discussion is, that's a long discussion. I had my own brother said the baby boomers are to blame for like a lot of this problem, that we got so spoiled with all that money, and now we need to get out of the way so that they can make decisions, right? That we're blocking the way for other people. So I also have heard some of those hardworking baby boomers, friends of mine that have retired now, state, and this seems to be a common thread, they're amazed at how much money there is that they have, right? Because they worked and raised families, and now they're retired and they have all this disposable income. And it's made me think more about the boomers, right? Because what's going to happen when they start flexing all that money, But
well, and the wealth transfer that's coming, and all the, there's so much on the financial side of that's really interesting to get into. We won't do it, but
the involvement part, though, I will say that when I was raising my family and I was in my 40s, I didn't have time for anything. I think I sat on church council, but I wouldn't have done any of these other things. I was literally asked to do these things. Some of the things I do now when I worked, and I had to tell them, I can't do that. I'm not even in town, right, when you have your meeting. So I think that there's a heck of a lot of truth to that the decisions are being made by, a lot of retirees or, thank goodness, career people who have brought their talents back into those arenas. And hopefully there are more of those.
Yeah, no, I don't think I could do any more than what I'm doing, which is our commitment is pretty low on Planning Commission. But I did when I was asked to apply, I thought, man, these are things that I talk about all the time that, people need to be involved. And I can't just, you don't get to just complain about stuff, like you got to do something. And I think there's something to the idea that if more people, because I don't have time for it, or it would be easy to say I don't have time for it. I've got kids and, they're of all ages, and, I've got a lot of responsibility in my career. And then there's the other things that we do. We've got family and friends and other things we're involved in. But I think it's important for people to think about just taking your turn. Just take a time. Doesn't have to be a long time. I've stayed because I felt like it has been productive. But, I think we would like to not have 20-year commissioners or 20-year mayors. Like, it would be better for everybody, I think, if everybody steps up to take a turn and not look at it like, kind of go back to, obviously I wasn't there, but just from what you hear of the founding of the country is that, they had to like convince George Washington to be president. And he put term limits in place, not so much because he could see the future. He's like, I want to make sure I don't get stuck doing this for any more than 2 terms. Like, that was his whole deal. So, and it turned out to be obviously the right thing to do. I think we should have term limits on almost everything, or maybe everything. I don't know, but I'm not smart enough for that conversation. But if people can get involved with something where they feel like they can have an impact, and even if it's 1 year, there's a lot of people around here that have a lot of valuable experience and knowledge and something to say. And even if you just show up to a meeting once in a while, that does, just being on this planning commission, it helps a ton. We like to hear, even if we don't agree with it, even if we're not going to change our opinion because of it, it's super beneficial to know where people are at. And so,
Jason, I've always tended to be too judgy on folks. Like, I'm involved, and so I say to myself, how come that person's not doing something? And what I find out most of the time is I'm wrong, that they are doing something. Yeah. It's just not what I'm involved in.
Yeah.
So I will pivot to, if you're not involved in something, One thing is about all you need, and you'll be amazed at your personal growth. For me, whether it's patience or listening, it's much more. I will leave this. It's the benefit is not to the community, although they get a benefit from me being involved. The benefit's actually that for me, that
Absolutely.
I became smarter, that I became a better person. And if I contribute a little bit to the city at the same time or the county, then good. But at least I'm a better citizen.
Yeah. And I think that's a good place to wrap up.
I got to pee. So
yeah, me too. But yeah, no, thanks for coming in. And yeah, we should have you back anytime things are popping up that would be good. Let me to talk about and some of the stuff you're working on. Let me know. I'd love to have you back on that stuff. I want to keep people as up to date with these kind of things where they at least know, and maybe just how people can be involved in some of the stuff that you're doing, and we'll just end it there.
Happy to do it.
Yeah. So if people want to know more about any of this stuff, where do you send them?
Any questions?
Do you guys have websites? Do you have
the best place to go?
Organizations?
The Lewis County, the Lewis Conservation District is the absolute best place to go. If you have salmon streams, if you want to learn more about your property, if you're a farmer and you want to know about your ditches, the Conservation District is the place to go. They will send somebody there. They will help you with this, and they'll educate you.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll ease on out of here. See you next time.